Today, I'm sharing with you my top 10 worst crochet projects that I have ever made. And even though none of these projects turned out the way I had imagined they would, they did teach me invaluable lessons about tension, yarn choice, color combinations, just to name a few. Hi, I'm Elise from EliseRoseCrochet.com, and crochet allows for boundless creativity. But along with the masterpieces, there are going to be those projects that, well, didn't quite turn out as planned. As a crocheter, I've had my fair share of learning experiences, but now I affectionately refer to them as my worst crochet projects ever. But instead of just bashing my work, I'm going to show you each one of the projects, the mistakes I made, and the lessons I learned. But I would love to know, what are your worst crochet projects? But more importantly, what did you learn from them? And leave those in the comments section below. If you've ever been to my channel before, you may recognize this little amigurumi bunny. This is a pattern and tutorial from Woolly Wonders Crochet, and I cannot find the original image of what this little bunny should look like, but I'm gonna let you use your imagination. There are so many problems with this little bunny, but the first and most obvious is that the stuffing is showing through. Second, there are obvious stitch mistakes all over his body, his legs, arms, ears, everywhere. And even with all of those faults, I am still so in love with this little bunny and think that she is perfectly imperfect. Here are the lessons I learned from this bunny. First, I was a beginner. I had zero experience with amigurumi. When I started this project, I wasn't sure I was even going to be able to make her. So when I finished this little bunny, I was so excited. I wasn't blind to the mistakes, but it didn't matter to me. This little bunny jump-started my interest in amigurumi and helped me to believe that I could do it. Since then, I have crocheted dozen, maybe even 100 amigurumi toys, and I have no plans on quitting anytime soon. Let's take a moment to talk about today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform for creative-minded people. They have thousands of amazing creative classes in areas like sewing, crocheting, and knitting, just to name a few. What's great is that all Skillshare classes are online, you can learn from the comforts of your own home, and they are all ad-free. One of my favorite new Skillshare classes is from Lee Sartori of Coco Crochet Lee. The class is Intermediate Crochet, Create an Amigurumi, and this is perfect for those crocheters who are ready to level up their existing skills. This class contains 10 different lessons, and it's going to walk you through how to make this adorable amigurumi sheep. One of my favorite classes is about how to add that popcorn texture. That can be a tricky technique, but Lee is going to walk you through how to do it, and you're going to end up with an amigurumi toy that you love. And what's even better is that the first 500 people to click the link in the description box below will get a 1-month free trial to Skillshare. Lee also has other classes on how to make your first garment, a crocheted t-shirt, Tunisian crochet, crocheting a shawl, and crocheting a colorful mandala bag. But make sure to take some time to explore all of the other creative classes Skillshare has to offer. There's something for everyone. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. The next worst crochet project that I've ever made is the Jenna Basket, and this is designed by Tony from TL Yarn Crafts. And at first glance, you may wonder, what's the problem? It looks great. I really did enjoy making this, and it has this beautiful wooden base, and it's crocheted with t-shirt yarn. T-shirt yarn can be a little tough to work with, but it does create a very sturdy, structured crocheted piece. But if you compare my basket with the one that Tony made, you're gonna notice a glaring, obvious problem. Can you spot what's wrong with mine? Well, if you take a closer look at this basket, you're going to notice that the sides dip in, and they're not supposed to. And this is entirely due to my tension. I was crocheting this basket way too tight, and although it is totally usable, there's nothing wrong with it, it did create two problems. The first and most obvious is that the shape is incorrect. It shouldn't have that dipped in part on the sides, but also it ended up creating a lot of pain in my wrist, in my hands, and what I should have done is listened to my body first and realized, hey, this isn't working. This is very painful. But also, if I had just loosened up my tension, or maybe even gone up 1 crochet hook size, or 2 if I needed to, I would have ended up with a basket that had that perfect shape. The next project in my collection of what I affectionately refer to as my worst crochet projects ever is the alien bear. This is a project that I worked on early in my amigurumi design career, and he's just weird. Not only does he not have arms, because I realized after I crocheted the body and the head that the proportions were way off, and that's why I went, I'm not even gonna add the arms because what's the point? His head is obviously way too large for his body. The shape of the head isn't correct, and that neck is way too narrow. But I learned a ton from this project. After I made this little guy, I'm so glad that I didn't frog the entire project, but I just put him away, and it might have been months, it could have even been a year later, I happened to notice him out of the corner of my eye. And I remembered right away why I had nicknamed him Alien Bear. I grabbed my little notebook and started looking through all of the pattern that I had written out, and I started to think, wait a minute, there's something here. I actually really like the construction of the body, just not the head part. And it got me thinking about a little pig with this style body. Eventually that led to my 3 little pigs pattern, and that has morphed into more and more patterns. And now this is a body style that I really like. I use this all the time in other crocheted amigurumi projects. And what I learned is that just because a project is a failure in your own eyes doesn't mean that there aren't valuable lessons to be learned from the experience. My next project is from my early days of crochet, and I started back in 2016, and I was so excited about crocheting that I could barely put my crochet hook down. The first thing I learned how to do was to make a granny square, and I was inspired by this blanket design by Alicia Paulson. I dove right in and crocheted the wonkiest granny square blanket you've ever seen. I don't have it in my possession anymore because my poor sister-in-law was expecting her first baby, and I gave it to her. And the problem isn't that the squares weren't perfect. That's not the big deal to me. But the project is all wrong because of one mistake that I made. The lesson I learned from this project is about the importance of choosing your colors. In my mind, I thought that this was going to be the perfect little blanket for a brand new baby boy, but now I can look back in retrospect and see that the colors were all wrong. When you look at Alicia Paulson's Sunshine Day Afghan, you can see that all of the squares have a dark background. There are 2 different shades of brown going on. One's lighter and one's darker. But the entire blanket doesn't feel dark or depressing. It is the exact opposite. It is so cheerful and cozy. The browns are balanced with pinks, blues, whites, and mustard colors. What I learned is the importance of taking time to choose colors. Now I use resources like Pinterest to find different color palettes, but I also use the Crochet Studio app, which has all of these pre-designed color palettes just for crocheters. I went into more detail about how to use this app in my video 10 crochet blanket tips, and I will leave a link for that in the description box below, and I'll also leave a link to the app as well. The next project in my collection of worst crochet projects ever is this little fox. You might not even be able to tell it's a fox, but it is. There are quite a few problems with this little design, but the most obvious is the proportions of the face. The head size and shape aren't bad, but it is the proportion of the facial features that is the problem. The lesson I learned is that when making amigurumi, the face is the most important part. As humans, we are drawn to looking at the faces of animals, of humans, and even the toys that we create. This little fox had a lot of potential, but where I went wrong is in the placement of the eyes. They're way too low and wide apart, and if you notice, they're well below where the nose is, and that was kind of an odd choice for me at the time to make. Now, when I make crocheted amigurumi toys, I spend a good amount of time playing around with the placement of the eyes. I put them higher, I put them lower, I put them closer together and further apart. I even experiment with sizes of safety eyes to see which one looks the best. If I had taken time to experiment with the eye placement, this little fox might never have made this list. Early on in my crochet journey, I made this set of dishcloths, and this pattern is from the Vintage Style Crochet Projects book, and I'll leave a link for it in the description box below. This is one of my favorite crochet books of all time. The projects are beautiful beautiful, but the color combinations are absolutely incredible. But my problem was that I was inexperienced and I didn't take the time to think about what type of yarn I should use for this project. I crocheted these dishcloths with acrylic yarn, but that mistake helped me to learn the importance of taking the time to choose the right yarn for the project. Dishcloths are typically crocheted with 100% cotton because it is very absorbent and it will hold up to multiple washings and dryings. Acrylic is less absorbent than cotton and also doesn't do well when you're trying to clean up a greasy mess. But it was a good lesson to learn because now I make sure to spend time choosing the best yarn for the project. The second amigurumi project that I ever crocheted was Little Victor Frog from Animal Friends of Peek-a-Pow. I mean, how cute is this little guy? And if you've ever been to my channel before, you may know that I have a slight obsession with anything designed by Jan Schenkel of Animal Friends of Peek-a-Pow. I cannot help but love this little frog, all of his mistakes, but I did learn a very valuable lesson when crocheting him. The lesson that I learned when crocheting amigurumi is the importance of finding the correct combination of yarn and hook size. If you can see your stuffing showing through your amigurumi toy, go down in hook size. This is the best way to get the correct tension. Testing out different crochet hook sizes is going to help you discover what the best combination is for the yarns that you're using and your own personal tension. That way you end up with toys that you love. In 2019, I crocheted this Easter Bunny headband and it's a free pattern from Grace and Yarn. And the minute I saw it, I knew I needed to have it in my life. This is a beautifully written pattern, but I got the wild hair that I wanted to experiment and change up the type of yarn she recommended. Stephanie used a worsted weight yarn, which I have plenty of in my stash, but I decided that I wanted to try a chunky chenille yarn. I adjusted the pattern a bit to accommodate the heavier weight yarn, but I didn't take into consideration one important factor. The lesson I learned is that when substituting yarns for a project, it is important to know the properties of that yarn. What surprised me most about using that chenille yarn was that it created such a heavy headband that the ears will not stick up. They flop all different directions. But that's not the only problem. The headband is so heavy and it wants to move around. It would have been better if I had just used the recommended yarn. And I do think that the floppy ears are cute, but I wanted the ears to stick straight up the way they do in the picture from Grace and Yarn. Another item in my collection of worst crochet projects ever is this gorgeous colorful granny square blanket. This was a pattern that I adapted from this book, Granny Square's 20 Crochet Projects with a Vintage Vibe. And while I love how this blanket looks, I do not like how this blanket feels. I had a huge stash of Paintbox Wool Mix Aran, and I bet you can tell where this is going. This is a fantastic yarn for amigurumi, and I still have quite a bit of it. But I thought, hey, let me work down some of this stash and I'm going to make a blanket. But I will never, ever use this yarn for a blanket again. This yarn is 50% wool and 50% acrylic, and when you're holding the skein, it actually feels very soft. And while I don't mind the feel of wool on my skin, it does not feel good as a blanket, and there are two reasons for that. First of all, the blanket is scratchy, but the second is an even bigger problem. The lesson I learned is that wool is heavy. Because I had a very sick cat last year, Mr. Pickle had FIP and we were treating him and had to weigh him every few days. I have a very sensitive baby scale. And I decided that I wanted to weigh this blanket to see how much does it actually weigh. But more importantly, I wanted to compare it to another blanket of a similar size that I like the feel and the weight of it. I chose the Granny Goes large blanket because it is a very similar size, and it was 0.70 kilograms, which equals 1.54 pounds. Then I put the wool blanket on the scale and it weighed 1.15 kilograms, and that equals 2.5 1.53 pounds. That's a 1 pound difference. And while that may not sound like a lot, it feels like a lot. A 2.5 pound blanket feels weighty, and some people really like that, but that is not something that I like with a blanket, especially when it's scratchy. But the other big problem that I discovered, and I don't know why that I didn't think about this before, is that I can't just throw this blanket in the washer and dryer like I can my other blankets that I have made with cotton and acrylic. Otherwise, I'm going to end up with a much smaller blanket. So now, I think about what fibers am I going to be using for a project and how is that going to work long term. The next project in my collection of worst crochet projects ever has to do with my daughter's wedding. She got married 5 months ago and it is one of the happiest days of my life. The wedding itself was beautiful and my daughter could not have been more stunning. But to commemorate their nuptials, I decided a few weeks before the wedding that I was going to design and make amigurumi dolls that looked like them. And in my haste to get these done in time for the wedding, I made one critical error. The lesson that I learned is one of the hardest lessons that I have ever had to learn as a crocheter, and that is to take good notes. This truly has been one of the hardest lessons I've learned because I am trying to recreate these dolls so that I can release the pattern. Many of you have said that you want to crochet your own bride and groom, and I am doing my best, but I did a terrible job when it came to taking notes. Instead of writing out nice, neat notes that made sense to my future self, I decided to take the existing pattern of my 3 not so little pigs and adapt it. And I wrote all of these unintelligible notes to myself, which at the time made complete sense to me. And now as I am trying to write this pattern out and recreate this bride and groom, it's not going well. Let's just say that it's not going well. I wish I could go back in time and grab myself by the shoulders and say, snap out of it. That's a reference to the 1987 movie Moonstruck with Cher. I love that movie. But I wish that I could. I wish I could tell my past self, take better notes. Since then, I take meticulous, detailed, well thought out notes when I am designing amigurumi toys. And I guess I wouldn't really know to do that unless I had made this terrible mistake with my bride and groom dolls. And hopefully it's going to end up okay, but at this point I'm not sure if I'm ever going to be able to recreate exactly what I made for my daughter's wedding. It can be disheartening to go back and look at the crochet projects that you've made some big mistakes with, but take the time to look at the lessons that you can learn from those mistakes because they are many times the best teachers. They serve as a reminder that behind every great crochet piece that has few mistakes, that there are many that are mistake riddled. They have lots of problems, but they taught me the most and have made me the crocheter that I am today. Just remember that when you're looking at your crochet projects and you find those mistakes and you're learning those hard lessons, it's going to make you a better crocheter, I promise. I hope you enjoyed today's video and make sure to leave in the comment section below your worst crochet project ever, but more importantly, what lesson did you learn? And make sure to get your 1 month free trial to Skillshare. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Stay safe and happy stitching.